Testing, testing. Testing, testing. Testing, testing.
Good morning. Sorry for it's not very late. This is Felicia Marcus, Chair of the Board, and today is Tuesday, February 6th at 9:33 a.m., and the meeting is called to order. With me, to my left, Vice Chair Stephen Moore. To his left, apparating in a moment, will be Board Member Didi D'Adamo. To my right, Board Member Tam Dodak, and to her right, Board Member Joaquin Esquivel. Ms. Sobeck, will you please introduce the staff that are assisting us today?
Thank you, Chair Marcus. On my left is Andy Sawyer, representing the Office of Chief Counsel. On my right, my Chief Deputies Jonathan Bishop and Eric Oppenheimer. Also assisting is the Clerk to the Board, Janine Townsend, and her assistant, Courtney Tyler.
Terrific, thanks. For those of you who aren't familiar with our emergency evacuation procedure, or those of you who may have forgotten, look around for the exit sign nearest you, and if you hear an emergency-like sound, assume it is, and proceed cautiously with your friends and your stuff to the exits and go down the stairs. If you need assistance Someone will escort you to a protected area on this floor. We convene during those emergencies or emergency drills over at the corner of 10th and J. If you want to wait with us in the park, you'll know when the all clear is sounded and can join us. The other thing is that the meeting is being webcast and recorded, so please, when you come up, be sure to speak into the microphone, but not exactly rock star style, because it can create a static noise for folks who are listening and recording on the other end. But it is important that you're close enough that it be picked up so that the people on the webcast, let alone in the back of the room, can hear you. Finally, the last but most important item, particularly to Board Member Dodek, silence your sound-making devices in whatever way you wish. I never mind if it's a funny ring. She does, so. Today is Tam Day, so I'll go for, okay, it can be Tam Week. I owe you that at least. All right, with that done, we're on to the public forum session of our agenda, which is when anyone can come and speak to the board on an item that is not on the agenda for the day. Do we have any cards? And as a reminder, if you wish to speak today on an item, we prefer that you fill out a blue card in the back of the room and hand it to Ms. Townsend as early as possible, just for our management of the hearing day. All right, next matter, minutes from the January 9th board meeting. I will entertain a motion.
Move adoption of the minutes. It took me for a bit to remember whether or not I read them, but I did.
Oh, good, perfect. Do I have a second?
Second.
And you have one abstention.
All set? Okay, all in favor,
Aye.
other than the abstention? All right.
Aye.
We've got the minutes. We now have items 2 through 6, which are uncontested as of before this hearing. A lot of them took an incredible amount of effort, as those of you who've worked on them know, but in the interest of time and getting to the matters where folks have come to appear in front of us to speak, if we don't have a card, and we do not, I'll entertain a motion for items 2 through 6.
All right. Move to adopt items 2 through 6.
Yes, I'll second and also just echo your statement about how much work went into this, and thank the Santa Ana Board and the Central Valley Board, but also a very serious, important item, number 2, to leverage the SRF program with a lot of input, a lot of hard work from staff. So second the motion.
Terrific. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks to everyone. Again, the amount of time we spent on it today does not indicate anything about the amount of time we spent on these issues leading up to today. All right, that takes us to item number 7, the current hydrologic conditions. Mr. Demchuk, I'm looking for silver linings, but I don't know if there are any. Oh yeah, make sure it's on.
Oh. Good morning. My name is Vadim Demchuk. I'm an engineer with the Division of Water Rights, and I'm here to present item number 7, the hydrology update for the Bay Delta watershed. Okay, what did I do there? No. Looking at precipitation in our state, we had moderate precipitation in January after what looks like a historically dry December. As of February 1st, for Northern Sierras, we're looking at 19.6 inches at 70% of average for this date. For Central Sierras, the index is at 9.2 inches, 45% of average.
I just don't like anything in the light blue. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not even mentioning the blue yet. It's just really that bad.
No, I totally have a drought hangover, so I'm having trouble with this.
And for Southern Sierras, we have 4.5 inches in the blue at 31% of average for this date. So unfortunately, not much precipitation for the 2 months into what is typically California's wettest 3 months. We're looking at reservoir conditions as of last Friday. Last year's very abundant snowpack results in the above average conditions as we see here. DWR estimates 106% of historical average for this time of year for the overall storage. So at least that's the good news.
That's right. No, that's the thing that keeps me from, I won't even say.
And looking into the details, Lake Shasta at 109% historical average, sitting at 3.4 million acre feet. Folsom Lake sitting at 581,000 acre feet, 114% of historical average. Lake Oroville is at 1.4 million acre feet, 61% of historical average, again lower than average lake levels due to that construction at the spillway. San Luis Reservoir, 108% of historical average, 1.7 million acre feet. The state share is at 72% of operational capacity, and the federal share is at 100%.
That's nice.
Kachuma Reservoir, 37% of capacity, 48% of average.
Now, that's the surprise with all the rain. So you have on one neighboring area, you end up with those horrendous mudslides, and it somehow escaped giving any benefit to Kachuma.
Yeah,
That
actually,
is a selective cloud.
I was looking at the slides from previous month since we didn't report since last month, and nothing really changed between these two reservoirs. So that was interesting. Diamond Valley Lake at 92%
Great.
of capacity.
Oh,
So here's the snow water content, scary slide. As of February 1st, 2018 numbers are in the blue. Going from top to bottom is Northern Sierra, Central and Southern Sierras. We have anemic snowpack. As you can see, it's trending at that record low 2014-2015 red line. Unfortunately, the precipitation that we had in January fell as rain as opposed to snow. And so that's where we're at,
Yeah,
below the 20, under 20% of the April 1st average.
thanks. I actually have to say, I was telling my husband last night that there's a big difference when we're looking at the beginning of January. It's early in the season. We're at halftime now, and it's just every week that goes by, I get nervouser and nervouser about this. But halftime, so we'll see.
Here's the space view showing the differences in snowpack between January 2018 and January 2017. So this is 2018. This is what we had last year.
Right here.
Again, in case you missed it.
Thank you so much for getting that, and now you'll have to show me how to do it on my computer.
No problem.
I know I asked for this. It's a very cool visual.
So drought conditions have certainly changed since our last update. We have the drought returning to about 44% of the state. Southern California, of course, getting the biggest hit, and that dryness creeping northward as we continue here. Severe drought conditions have returned to Santa Barbara and Ventura counties, where we know the December fire has devastated huge tracts of land. This is the forecast from the Climate Prediction Center, and this map shows the likelihood of temperature being above, below, or normal scenarios. So as you can see here, the short-term outlook is showing at least 70% chance of above normal temperatures for most of the state. Likewise, the short-term precipitation forecast is showing at least 60% chance of below normal precipitation. And so basically that ongoing warm and dry spell due to the ridge is persistent, and it's melting that little snow that we did have below that 8,000-foot elevation line. I would like to end off with this figure showing the chances of reaching normal precipitation for our state. The top row is California. The first panel is water year to date, percent of normal. Notice the difference between the northern and southern region. And so the second panel showing odds of reaching 75% of the state Northern California remains above 50% chance. Southern California dips down to 30 to 50%. Odds of reaching a normal water year, it drops to 20% throughout the state, and odds of reaching over 100%, very unlikely, drops even more to under 10% throughout the state. And so the odds are really stacked up against us in terms of reaching a normal water year. But we're still riding on the success of water year 2017. But we could only go so far with the current reservoir levels that we have, given the very little snowpack that we have. And so hopefully the lessons learned from the last drought can help us put our best foot forward as we tackle the challenges that are ahead of us, which looks like another drought year. I would also like to remind that we will have DWR as well as Reclamation speak next time how they face these challenges ahead for February 20. And so this concludes my portion of the brief. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer.
Very nicely done. Questions?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, great job and overview. One thing that we're trying to do is encourage the groundwater storage as a substitute for snowpack storage, looking ahead. As you said, the surface water storage in the state gets us through a year, 2, 3, if we're paying close attention. But what's the general story on groundwater? And if you don't have the specifics, I think it's worth bringing to the table that that's part of our shock absorber system to deal with the complete lack of rainfall in a year like this.
Yes,
and snowfall.
That's a good note. I am currently looking at what we have for groundwater in terms of the fall data, and it looks like the Department of Water Resources hasn't updated their website just yet, but when it comes out, we will definitely give you an update on that.
Great. We might want to bring in some folks to talk about some of the innovative recharge efforts. The sustainable conservation might be, depending on our workshop day schedule, I was thinking about doing one on stormwater and capture, because there's so many cool things happening across the state. We could do it on the same day or do it as a separate thing to highlight some of the people that are doing innovative work out there to try and figure out how to get water into the ground faster. That might be.
Yeah, it's an important question about trying to have a currency of storage for these innovative projects that are getting underway or underway. It would be a great analysis if we could provide it to the public to show, okay, we have this much less snowpack this year, but thanks to these investments at the local, state, federal level, we have this much more storage, in terms of a water balance that we're achieving through implementation of the action plan. Ultimately, it's easier said than done, but that type of accounting, I think we need to be taking very seriously in the next 5-10 years.
I think on that point, I know there's discussion about this year having an update to the water action plan, just an implementation update. So maybe that may be a good conversation to have with Resources Agency as they say, okay, well, how do you then quantify, the investments that we've made? How do you quantify some of the actions that we've done through the drought, through the water action plan when it comes to the numbers? And to your point, it's really hard, but maybe a worthy endeavor.
Cool. Thank you both. And thank you very much, as always. That was very nicely done. Okay, drum roll, item number 8.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and members of the board. My name is Kathy Freevert. I'm a conservation specialist in the Office of Research, Planning, and Performance, and I'm here today to give our 43rd monthly update on urban water conservation. So as you know, our emergency regulation, along with the monthly reporting requirement, expired in November of 2017. So the last 2 months are the first months where we've transitioned to voluntary monthly reporting. And I just want to start off too by mentioning that compared to information provided last week, a few additional suppliers are in the information and in the presentation that I'll be giving. So there'll be some slight variation in the numbers. Next slide, please. Oh, here it is. So in December of 2017, the urban water use as compared to 2013 shows a 2.9% savings. This amounts to 3.7 billion gallons saved, which is enough to provide water for 57,000 people for a year. Also note that we had 91% of suppliers reporting, and compared to last
Wait,
month.
can we go back
Oh,
to the number
oh,
for a minute? Just
yes.
not that I want to dwell on that number.
Okay,
I don't really
okay.
like single digits when we do these reports, and you'll probably talk about it a little bit. The question is how concerned to be about this low single digit number. I mean, I'm looking at the pure numbers, and we know that December is not when people tend to water outdoors, so it's not a big month where you expect conservation, but are you guys worried, or is it like, let's see what happens in January and February?
Well, it is significantly lower than what we have seen in other months. December is a month where there is typically less water used compared to other months, so that you know, we would expect to see a smaller number. But, well, I'll show you a little bit more down the way here. So.
I have to say, I love your new format with the big number until this month.
So our reporting participation was a little bit lower. In November, we had 25 suppliers that chose not to submit reports, and in December, it was 35. And comparing the numbers to 2013, we have 133 suppliers that showed no savings. And we have in the top dark blue wedges a little less than a third that show more than 10% savings as compared to 2013. Moving along and showing some of the statewide numbers, we have the statewide average residential water use per capita, gallons per capita, is 78. Which is 20% more than last year. And if you look across the state, you'll see on the northwest portion, we have 48 gallons per person per day, which is lower than 2013. And as you move south and inland, that number increases. At South Coast, you'll see that they're basically where they were in 2013. And you'll see South Lahontan is actually an increase.
So if we look at this, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is you don't have the temperature chart going.
No.
But it means this is outdoor water use. It's got to be outdoor water use, and it's hot. But
yeah, and as we saw in the previous presentation, that December was a very dry month, and it was a warm month as well. Since we're at the end of the year, we can look at annual averages over several years, and you'll see here that overall for the 2017 year, we're about 20 gallons per person less than 2013, and we're about 5 gallons per person more as compared to the last 2 years.
now there's a chart I can live with. No, and thank you for
Yeah.
putting it in perspective. I mean, we've always said you can't cherry pick a month. You've got to look at the whole year. And the fact that we would have some bounce back is not surprising. So we'll just have to see how that number plays out. But this makes me feel a little bit better because.
Yeah, in the context. Also, what we've learned is, we'll have these dry seasons within the wet season, and so there's some years in that flat part of the cumulative hydrology graphs, you'll see this big flat line on December this year, January a couple of years back. So it does speak to, if we talk about performance, having a wet season, dry period performance target, that takes into account keeping things going, but recognizing the lack of precipitation and coming up with realistic expectations. Because in this case, yeah, with temperature and no precipitation, there will be some outdoor use to keep things going, keep things alive.
Yeah. Another way we can look at this information is to see the trends over the years, and we have 2013 shown in the dark blue, and this shows then from 2014 through 2017, which is the orange line. So based on 91% of suppliers reporting, the preliminary water production in December 2017 was 124.8 billion gallons. And if we consider that 9% that chose not to report, and if we conservatively estimate what they would have produced using last year's number, it would add about 5 billion gallons, and you'd be at about 130 billion, which would be comparable to where we were in 2013.
Oh, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah.
Do you think that's why they didn't report? Do you have a sense of the 10? And you don't need to report it now, but are you guys going to call the 10 that didn't report and ask them what's the deal?
We can certainly do that.
I
It
would be
is
curious
right
as to
now
what they would say.
voluntary. And there are a few that are very conscientious and called and have contacted us when, for example, they're dealing with a fire emergency.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, can we not report, or we're not going to report for a while because we're dealing with this, and that's certainly understandable.
Yeah, I'd just like to know.
Yeah, okay. So some next steps. We will encourage continued reporting, and given our population growth, which has been noted at previous meetings, it's almost 1.3 million since 2013, combined with some incomplete voluntary reports. We will move away from comparisons to the 2013 water production as a baseline. So this means that we still will show trend lines, but we won't be expressing them as a percent related to 2013.
Oh.
So we'll look at some options for sharing this information, but moving away from that percentage number.
All right. I'm going to want to see that, though, just to give me comfort as we move away from it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just because there is a helpful thing. I mean, the further we get from it, the less relevant technically it might be. So I want to see the other ones. It's just, it gives you a sense of before drought and after, which then gives us a read on the consciousness level out there, which is useful for something that may not be the most useful thing. So I might want it to be a both and rather than a either or.
Well, we'll
until I'm
share some
comfortable.
ideas with you on that. And as you know, we have the regulation that's in progress on prohibited wasteful water use practices. We are in a comment period right now. Those comments are due noon on February 14th, and a hearing is scheduled for February 20th. And anyone who's interested in the documents for this rulemaking, it's at the web link that's shown there on the slide. And finally, we will continue to monitor the winter participation, and as noted, we'll encourage those monthly reports to continue. And that sums up
Questions
this.
or observations? All right, thanks very much.
Okay.
You guys have done great work throughout this whole period. There's one thing from the last item or related to the last item I'd just like to flag, and I'm not entirely sure. It probably needs to be a set of players, but I think we need to pull together a group to talk about that Kachuma, Santa Barbara area, complicated, of course, by all of their fire response, but I'd love to just have a sit down, probably has to be pretty early in the morning, just to talk about what are the things we can do to be helpful. Board Member Esquivel and I went down there and met with their drought task force, but I think we need to, they're not in good shape, so I think we do need to figure out what are all the things we can do to help them, and I want to understand all the things we're also doing to help with their the fire response as well. So some focus on that area, I think, would be called for in the next week or so.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I actually had a discussion with Jean-Pierre Wolf and John Robertson last week, and they've been very active in permit issues and also cleanup and disposal. So
Right.
bringing the region in, I think,
Perfect.
would be helpful.
That's terrific. That would just be great. I ran into Senator Jackson, and I didn't realize how bad it was. I didn't know what the numbers on Kachuma were going to be, but she let me know they didn't get any benefit out of it. So, all right, thanks. All right, item number 10 is deferred to a future board meeting. Item number 9.
Morning, Madam Chair. Darren Paul Hemus, Deputy Director for the Division of Drinking Water. And item number 9 is asking the board to adopt regulation package for us to move forward with setting regulations for point of use, point of entry. Certainly, we're prepared to give a presentation this morning if that's the pleasure, but I think there's very few commenters, so we could also jump to questions. Pleasure of the chair on how you would like to proceed.
Why don't, here's what I would suggest. I would suggest a short presentation for the people listening over the web.
Great.
Because it's an important issue, and a lot of folks have spent a lot of time on it. So
We clocked it yesterday. It's like,
Madeline, I know you're listening, but
yeah, it's short.
If you just do it, you don't have to go through every single thing on every slide, but
Okay.
just enough time to give us the overview for anyone tuning in. It's
Sure.
a big deal, so you don't want to leave it to nothing.
Yep, we'll do that. Okay, so joining me today doing the presentation will be Melissa Hall. She's the senior over our regulatory group. We have David Rice from Office of Chief Counsel also assisting, and then Mark Bartson, also manager in DDW over the regulation, and Eugene Long, our technical expert extraordinaire for detailed questions if you try to stump us. Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah, I challenge you to do that, so.
Whenever I ask who would know the answer to this, your name comes up.
His name comes up 9 times out of 10, yes. Okay, so Melissa, take it away.
Good morning. Today's public hearing is to consider a resolution to adopt permanent regulations governing the use of point of use and point of entry treatment devices for public water systems serving fewer than 200 service connections in lieu of centralized water treatment facilities to achieve compliance with drinking water standards. Public workshops were held last March ahead of the 45 and 15-day comment periods. The Regulatory Development Unit has begun compiling and responding to comments received by the comment deadlines, and a draft response to comments is available on our website and is part of the agenda materials for today's hearing. Following adoption of the resolution, staff will complete the response to comments, the final statement of reasons, and other necessary documents before submitting the rulemaking package to the Office of Administrative Law. The current anticipated effective date of the regulations is July 1st of this year. This presentation will include a description of the proposed regulations, including background on point of use and point of entry devices, limitations on the use of the devices, the benefits of adopting the proposed regulations, the statutory and regulatory basis of the proposed regulations, a brief overview of how point of use and point of entry devices have been used under the emergency regulations, and a comparison between the expired emergency regulations and the proposed permanent regulations. We'll follow that with a quick discussion of some of the comments received and staff's responses to those comments. For many water systems relying on groundwater, the water system is able to deliver water straight from the well as it already meets drinking water standards. For some systems, the source may require treatment for just 1 or 2 contaminants, such as arsenic or nitrate. When a drinking water source needs treatment, a public water system typically provides the treatment at the source, and all of the water throughout the distribution system meets drinking water standards. This is referred to as centralized treatment and is what we would like to see for all water systems. For some small water systems, however, centralized treatment may not be immediately economically feasible. So, in place of centralized treatment, the proposed regulations allow certain eligible public water systems the option of using point-of-use or point-of-entry treatment devices to comply with standards. A point-of-use or POU device treats the water at a single tap, for example, the faucet at a kitchen sink. Only the water from that tap will be treated to comply with drinking water standards. A point-of-entry or POE device treats the water entering the customer's home or building. The drinking water throughout that home is treated, but the service line to the home and the water in the public water system's distribution system is not treated. In addition to satisfying statutory requirements that will be described in the next few slides, the purpose and benefits of developing regulations governing the use of point-of-use and point-of-entry treatment devices include providing flexibility and alternatives in how water systems can achieve compliance with regulations and more rapidly supply safe drinking water where it is otherwise economically infeasible, and providing the detailed criteria and framework needed to ensure that point-of-use and point-of-entry devices are utilized in an effective, consistent, lawful, and safe manner that is protective of public health. In October 2015, Assembly Bill 434 amended California's Health and Safety Code sections 116380 and 116552. These amendments required the State Water Resources Control Board to adopt both emergency and permanent regulations for the use of point-of-use and point-of-entry water treatment devices in lieu of centralized treatment, and limited permit issuance for the use of these devices to 3 years or until funding for centralized treatment is available, whichever occurs first.
Okay, I broke the rule, sorry. It's because it's linked.
I want a 10 months now.
You get a 10 month, sorry. The phone is quiet. The iPad is telling me it's ringing, sorry. Check your multiple devices. The sound is off, sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, as you were saying.
Prior to this, unlike permits for point-of-use devices, permits allowing the use of point-of-entry devices were not restricted in duration. The California Department of Public Health had originally adopted emergency regulations for point-of-use devices in 2010 and for point-of-entry devices in 2011. Those emergency regulations expired on January 1st, 2014. From 2014 through the first few months of 2016, although the underlying law was still in effect, there were no regulations. On April 1st, 2016, this board's emergency regulations took effect, and they remained in effect until January 1st of this year, when they expired in accordance with law. In preparing these regulations, we had a few constraints. There are 3 main statutory and regulatory bases for California's point-of-use and point-of-entry regulations. They're the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act and its regulations, California's Health and Safety Code Section 116380, and Health and Safety Code Section 116552. Section 116380 both requires the State Water Board to adopt regulations for point-of-use and point-of-entry devices and limits what those regulations may include. In particular, Section 116380 specifies that these devices are only to be allowed instead of centralized treatment when it's demonstrated that centralized treatment is not immediately economically feasible, for water systems with less than 200 service connections, where the usage is not prohibited by the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act and its regulations and guidance, and for water systems that have submitted applications for funding to correct the violations that the devices would be used for. Section 116552 added 2 requirements. The first is that there must be no substantial community opposition, and the second is that the drinking water permits issued be limited to not more than 3 years in duration or until funding for centralized treatment is available, whichever occurs first. This does not preclude a water system from reapplying for another 3-year permit, but it does build in a timeline for reevaluating the feasibility of centralized treatment. These next 3 slides are an overview of the limitations on the use of these devices to comply with drinking water standards in lieu of centralized treatment. The water systems must have fewer than 200 service connections, and to give an idea of the number of systems in California that are in that range, we have approximately 6,300 with fewer than 200 service connections, including 1,800 community water systems, 3,000 transient non-community water systems, and 1,500 non-transient non-community water systems. The water systems must demonstrate that centralized treatment is not economically feasible. Point-of-use devices are limited to contaminants other than microbial, VOCs, and radon. Water systems must have submitted an application for funding, and water systems must demonstrate that there is no substantial community opposition and must hold a public hearing. Point-of-use and point-of-entry devices must, in general, be third-party certified to applicable American National Standards Institute standard if one exists. Water systems must have programs and plans in place to assure safe and effective use of the devices, including operations and maintenance requirements, customer notification in the event of a device failing to meet drinking water standards, and a plan for provision of an alternate water supply to any impacted customers. The treatment devices must be owned, controlled, and maintained by the water system, and the devices must be equipped with mechanical warnings. For point-of-entry devices, every building connected to the water system must have a device installed, and the rights and responsibilities of the customer must convey with title upon sale of the property. For point-of-use devices, the water system must ensure that each residential or dwelling unit has a device installed in accordance with regulations. Permits for the use of these devices are limited in duration to 3 years or until funding for centralized treatment is available, whichever comes first. Again, this does not mean that a water system cannot apply for and receive another 3-year permit allowing the use of the devices, but it does build in a timeline for reevaluating the water system status with respect to factors such as community support and participation and the feasibility of centralized treatment. We're also proposing to require at least 2 months of pilot testing and as well as some additional monitoring. As of December 2017, over 100 water systems had implemented a point-of-use or point-of-entry program, or were considering doing so, with point-of-use devices preferred 3 to 4 times as often as point-of-entry devices. Contaminants targeted for treatment with these programs include selenium, fluoride, uranium, hexavalent chromium, arsenic, and nitrate, with 1 in 3 programs developed to address arsenic and over 40% developed to reduce nitrate concentrations. While the proposed regulations would allow the use of point-of-use and point-of-entry devices for systems with fewer than 200 connections, use so far has been predominantly by systems with fewer than 100 connections. While the proposed permanent regulations are very similar to the now expired emergency regulations, we are proposing some changes. In the permanent regulations, we're clarifying that a proposed new community water system cannot be permitted to use point-of-use or point-of-entry treatment devices in lieu of centralized treatment to comply with the Safe Drinking Water Act. We're specifying that the economic feasibility evaluation for community water systems will be based on the annual median household income to better account for those communities where the water users and income vary considerably from season to season or from month to month. We're clarifying that public hearing requirements do not apply to non-community water systems, although there is still a requirement to apply for funding to meet the conditions in the statute. Finally, we're requiring that not only will a water system have to submit monitoring and operations and maintenance plans, they will also have to implement the improved plans. At the Administrative Procedures Act hearing held in November 27th, we had 1 commenter attend and present questions and comments. We received substantive written comments from 5 organizations by the comment deadlines. And while generally supportive of the proposed regulations, some changes were requested. The next slide describes requested changes that may be of particular interest, but that did not result in changes to the proposed regulations. And we were able to meet with most of the, or meet or speak or correspond with most of the commenting parties. Several comments focused on limitations on point of use and point of entry use for compliance purposes and on the challenges of gaining 100% participation from the affected community. The commenters' concerns are noted and appreciated, but for many of the requested changes, the State Water Board is constrained by statutory and regulatory requirements. One commenter requested that to minimize interruption in the provision of safe drinking water, the term immediately economically feasible should be defined to mean that financing and installation of centralized treatment to provide safe drinking water will take longer than 90 days. While staff agree that there should be as little interruption as possible in the provision of safe drinking water while water systems are pursuing a permanent centralized means of ensuring compliance with standards, the time required to complete design, financing, and installation for a centralized treatment system will vary based on site conditions, the contaminant to be treated, and the selected treatment method. While 90 days might, in some instances, be an appropriate time frame, for many others it will not. So no changes to the regulation text are proposed in response to this comment. One commenter requested that the requirement regarding funding application demonstration be expanded to sources other than federal, state, or local agencies to include private sources as funding options. Applications for public funding tend to include the details necessary to evaluate whether the terms of the Health and Safety Code are met, specifically the requirement that the application is for funding to correct the violations for which the devices would be used. In addition, requiring that private funding be applied for is problematic without additional clear requirements. So no changes to the regulation text were proposed in response to this comment. One comment noted that for several contaminants, such as 1,2,3-trichloropropane and hexavalent chromium, there are currently no devices certified in accordance with an American National Standard Institute or ANSI standard. The proposed regulations do provide for use of point-of-use and point-of-entry treatment devices without independent third-party certification if they are approved by the State Water Board following a review of the design, construction, treatment performance, and available field or pilot test results. Because this alternative was already provided for in the proposed regulation text, no further changes have been proposed in response to this comment. And we did receive one late comment from the Farm Bureau in support of the proposed regulations. That concludes the staff presentation. For more details, the proposed regulations, the initial statement of reasons, and the complete regulatory package so far are all available at the link that's shown on this slide and in the notice of proposed rulemaking. All of the information relied on to develop the proposed regulations is available there.
Thank you. This is actually a really good summary, useful summary to save of some of the key issues. But for the folks who aren't as in the weeds of it, just see if I can simply lay out the point of the regulations. One is that point of use, point of entry treatment devices, depending on what you're treating for. Are you concerned about showers, for example, and washing machines in addition to drinking water at the sink? Is that it can be faster and cheaper to get people clean water than a centralized system, particularly in a small distributed community. However, we don't have the same confidence in it necessarily, and so we're requiring that you've got to have certified devices, or the other thing you just said, that's in the regs, and you've got to have a water system responsible for checking them, because putting in one of these systems and not maintaining it doesn't help people. And so you've tried to struggle with how do you create an opening for this faster, less expensive interim system, ideally, while also being protective of public health, which is what you're trying to do here.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess I would just emphasize the point that the faster and cheaper is in view of capital cost. I think, long-term wise, there has to be a dedicated maintenance, as you mentioned. Operation and maintenance costs will be, substantial. So it's not a freebie. And, there's now you've got a lot of multiple installed locations that you got to keep track of. It's a whole different level of, ongoing effort associated with maintaining them.
Excellent point. Great. Again, I'm just always thinking about the people who are listening over the web. Thank you. Are there questions or comments before we move to comments?
Yeah, real quick, two things. One, just thinking about walking in the shoes of those who would want to implement these. We saw comments about, first, it can be a daunting challenge to get 100% participation, but you noted in your response to comments that this is really required under I think, the Safe Drinking Water Act for point of use, point of entry type devices. And that may actually skew the population of the systems toward the smaller end in terms of trying to get 100% participation. Are there some examples of where we've seen, successful implementation of 100% participation, or what does that exactly mean? Are there any systems in a community where, some houses say we're not going to do point of use, point of entry, and then does that disqualify the whole system?
So in the regulations, to start the program, they may not achieve compliance right away, but we allow water system to move forward if there's no substantial community opposition. So that gives them a rolling program. So the big picture-wise is first you pilot test to make sure it works. You have a public hearing to say, this isn't a good option. This looks like it will work for us. And then you roll out if there's no community opposition. So hopefully over time, you will gain the 100% participation and be able to achieve that. So right now, for the ones that are successful, is mostly businesses, because they have full control of the water system, or schools, that they can come in and put in devices at all the water use locations. So those will be the lower hanging fruit, relatively speaking. But the community is hopefully over time, with the success, people will see this as a potential option for them and will be able to get more community participation. And I think there's a lot of work out there right now to look at different options, maybe not necessarily put it at the location, give people the choice of where they want to install the units, and just being flexible with that.
That's great discussion and clarification that you don't have to have 100% buy-in from the get-go, but you do work toward that in terms of, and then the overall community acceptance is the issue. The second question, again, we have a 3-year limit for good reasons. Try to get the centralized treatment in place. But that's not going to be feasible everywhere, as we know with our funding programs. It's a real challenge to get the bigger projects underway. But there are provisions here that have been clarified, I thought, relative to the emergency regulations, that you can reapply for another 3 years as that 3 years segment expires.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've, worked with the Division of Financial Assistance to clarify that, under those rules, we generally have to fund permanent situations. They don't want us to fund an in and out type of thing, but we've clarified that our funding is eligible for point of use, point of entry devices, that it is considered semi-permanent in those type of situations, and that, it's appropriate to evaluate it after a period of time to make sure that situations haven't changed. We don't want to strand a separate community on point of use, point of entry when other options in their area become available and they can convert to be on a centralized system, which, we continue to strive for. It's a recognition that we need this level of treatment to make sure people are getting healthy water, but that doesn't mean we're going to give up on trying to make sure that we have full supplies to everybody and that are healthful. I would comment too, kind of back on the other one, a point that often gets lost in this is that, and I've not in point of use, point of entry for drinking water, but I have experience with dealing with wastewater on-site systems at public homes, and dealing with private property is a huge deal. So a water system committing to dealing with residences and going into their home for point of use type of stuff will be huge. It creates all kinds of liability issues associated with, if you caused a house fire or something like that through electrical usage for these systems and stuff like that. So these are not without their other ancillary issues that we'll have to work through and help people with that, associated with that.
Yeah, it's not a silver bullet,
No.
a magic wand. It is one of those things where you also have people who won't let folks into their house because in order to install this, you probably need a building inspector to say your house is in compliance with its other permits. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of, but hopefully we can help a lot of people.
We want to help a lot of people, and I think this moves in that direction that, a substantial number of people will be served with this and find relief and get quality water.
All right. Speaker cards? None. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I'm glad we had this conversation, though. Sorry. I just thought there would be because I saw people in the audience. All right. Well, thank you. Do I have a motion on this fine item?
I move adoption of the staff recommendation.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, carries. Thanks for the good work.
Thank you.
All right. Item number 11. It goes to 11, yeah. Unless do people want to take a short break? Or are we okay to keep going? Okay. Oh, it's so nice the band is back together.
Okay, good morning.
Favorite.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and members of the board. My name is Greg Gerhardt. I'm Deputy Director of Information Management and Analysis at the Water Board. I'm joined today by the team that is the proud workers behind this year's performance report. So to my left is Bev Anderson-Abbs, and to that left is Rafael Maistu, and to the left of him is Robert Anderson, and to his left is Susan Kelly. And they did all the work. So to tell the report, and the water boards did all the work that's in the report. So we're happy here to present this year's annual performance report. I'm going to hand the slideshow over to Bev, and then it'll come back to me, and I'll talk about some of the next steps.
Oh, thank you. Good morning. We'd like to present the 2016-17 annual performance report at this time. The annual performance report, as many of you know, is it's web-based and it's organized by major functions such as plan and assess, regulation, and enforcement. It allows us to document and track the Water Board's efforts to protect water resources, as well as measuring work completed with respect to targets set by the regional boards and the programs within the board. 2016-17 was the 9th year of the annual performance report, and it's continuing to grow and improve as we work on it. It now consists of almost 200 separate report cards and 120 water quality or TMDL report cards. We're working on incorporating new data management strategies like the use of open data with direct links to allow more granular looks into the data, and the use of some data storytelling in some areas. We'll be highlighting some of those examples here today if we get a good link and can do that. To give you an idea of whether the reports are being used, the 2015-16 report had over 14,000 unique page views. So we are getting an indication that it is being used in a number of different ways. This graphic illustrates the general relationship between the desired environmental outcomes and the level of control that we have at influencing those outcomes. The ultimate intent of water board plans, policies, and permits is to protect and restore water resources. So ultimately, we would like to have targets and measures that are indicative of those kinds of environmental outcomes. Unfortunately, there are a lot of factors, both within and outside of the water board's control, that influence those water quality outcomes. So many of the measures and targets that we focus on are from the output end of the spectrum, where we can access data fairly readily and set targets that are meaningful for what we are doing. We have been working together. We've been working very closely with the water boards to put out a report like this based on the output type of information. We're adding new measures for the programs. Drinking water was added to the performance report in 2014. We're looking at how we can add cannabis, possible targets and measures for the future. So things will be changing over the future years as we can add some more information on that. We work with over 20 enterprise database applications, and we're constantly trying to work better and more efficiently with those databases. And this year, one thing I forgot to mention, we did reinitiate meetings with the regional boards and the programs to review the target setting. This was something that was done in the early years of the performance report and died away a little bit over the last several years, so we did reinitiate those and look forward to having more meetings with the regional boards and with the programs to better be able to show the work that's being done by the board.
Before you move off that one,
Yes.
it was my hope that in the evolution of the performance report, that feedback will come not only from regional board staff and internal staff, but also from our stakeholders. What have been your thoughts about incorporating that aspect of feedback, or at least encouraging that feedback?
Since I'm fairly new to the program, I'll hand this to Greg and have his input on that question.
In the last 2 years, as we've been working on this, we go out and talk to people. As you know, the external community is quite aware in some cases of our performance program. We have one of the best in the state in terms of state agencies, in terms of reporting out our information over the years. So we get feedback when we go speak to these other organizations. CalData, the GovOps runs a series of organizational meetings. It used to be the Performance Management Council, but they still talk about those things. And so we get feedback when we go to those. We went to EPA this year and partnered, and we plan to partner more, but we partnered with them on talking about how to evaluate their performance of their programs as it overlaps with the states. The short answer, though, is that every time I talk about this and relay the information, people seem surprised that it's there. So I don't know, how to make it more prevalent on our website and in our conversations, But I think there is a lot of work to do to help raise awareness of the report cards. But when we get feedback, we always try to incorporate it, at least in my experience.
So my request is you flag this, and in next year's performance report, I'd like to see a little bit more progress in that area.
My guess is too that some of your external partners through the open data challenges you've done, the report that UC Berkeley just did, those guys are big fans of what you've been doing, that they could help also in bringing people together to give you engagement, as well as thinking about, we have the list of our keys, or we can make a list of our key stakeholders on the issues, and we could probably do a concerted effort to talk to the key engagers from the environmental, the agricultural, and the urban water communities.
So one area that that has come to change is based on our interactions with our fee stakeholders. There's been a lot of work on the financial side of the reporting that has happened in the last year, based on their feedback for better information about how our money is allocated and how it's spent. So there is interaction and feedback from some of our stakeholders. We also have a lot of interaction with the environmental community on the, not so much on the performance report, but on the underlying data in on water quality in seed and swamp, and how that is available and how to use it. So,
and we can bring the two together.
So I'd like to.
I would just also say I've been the one that's presented this to the fee payers a few years at Board Member Diadamo's request, and it has been helpful in demonstrating sort of what the work is that we do for the fees that we collect. The observation I would say that I've heard from the fee payers is they'd like to see a more comprehensive report, more detail, more ability to drill down into information. But you know, and I think that's good input, but of course there's always been some tension between reporting on every aspect of everything we do and reporting on
things?
And doing and reporting on what are the most important things. And we've gotten more expansive over the years with the breadth of the report, but we've never intended it to be a representation of everything that we do. It would just be too much.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that piece of the discussion. I have found that this has evolved through time. First of all, there was, as Mr. Gerhardt mentions, just an unawareness of this performance report that could be used as a tool in the fee discussion workshops. And then I think it was helpful to have some discussion about how to use it, because my experience in conversations with the stakeholders was that they were just sort of confused as to how to use the document. What I'd be interested in next year when you come back would be to maybe have a discussion with our staff that's working on fees to get a better sense of where can we provide for improvements. I think that there are a number of stakeholders in particular that used to be on some of the stakeholder subcommittees, in particular Emily Rooney. And so I think reaching out to someone like that that's been involved in the performance report process since the beginning, that has also been involved in an effort to utilize the report in a specific setting.
Thank you very much. That's great foreshadowing. We have some slides later that'll talk a little bit about how we want to engage better and how we have engaged with some of the budget and fee information.
I think
We'll let you get to more slides, but you can see that we like this.
well, and just really quick, I think it's important to note as well that the report actually lives on the website, and then the formatting of it, the tools available within the report are all kind of based and dependent upon the health of our website more generally. And so yeah, I think it's important, to Eric's point, the amount of staff time that then takes to, dig up and drill up all this information. I think we should have an eye at how do we better automate a lot of that? How do we, reduce the amount of staff time it takes to pull out this information? And I know that Greg, you're definitely in that headspace, and just because it is so I think, critical and really, the thoroughness of it speaks to the work that the board is doing, and being able to just reduce that staff time and make it just more sort of a functioning ecosystem to be able to pull out this information, provide it to the public, and allow it to be then beneficial for others is I think, really important. But I think, given that the website is, where this report lives, it can help maybe feed into some of our discussions around how we can just improve that in general.
Okay, so with that, how do we find the performance report? With the new format of the web page, the link for the performance report has been moved. So we used to have a button on the left-hand side of the page. It's now way down at the bottom there's a large blue banner at the bottom of the main web page, and under the resources column, down at the bottom, and it doesn't show up very well on this image, but I've circled the performance report, the third link from the bottom on that homepage. And linking.
And I'm thinking, why do we have a picture of New England there? But it's probably not New England.
Not my decision.
I know. It's pretty though.
So that link currently will take you to the 15-16 performance report. That will be updated at the end of the meeting today, and it will take you to the recent report, which is 16-17. And from there, you can get access to those different sections of the performance report that I had mentioned earlier, the plan and assess, regulate, clean up, enforce, fund, allocate, and then the targets that the regions and the state board programs work from for the year. I'm just going to go a little bit into some of the target setting that was done and give some summary statistics on that, and then we'll start looking at some of the pages and some of the updates that we've been doing. So in this past fiscal year, at the beginning of each fiscal year, state and regional boards, divisions, and offices are asked to establish goals or targets for the workload to be achieved in the coming year. And then at the end of the year, we determine the actual work. So we do the data pulls to find out how many permits were written, how many inspections were done, things like that, those output-based measures to check against the targets that were set. This graph shows the statewide targets achieved across the regional water boards and the state water boards, divisions, and offices by three main categories. The inspections, which include enforcement and water rights largely, permitting, NPDES and WDR permits, and some of the other permits, and then all other targets, which would include things like TMDLs being written, basin plan amendments, other things along those lines that don't fit neatly into inspections or permits. And you can see here comparisons to 2015-16 and 2014-15, just to show the kinds of trends that we're seeing in how these targets are being met and how close we're coming in these. Typically, we see much higher or closer levels to the inspection targets because those are fairly small things to do and they're easier to plan for in most cases. So we tend to see a higher compliance with or meeting the targets in those areas. Things like writing policies, adopting basin plans can tend to get drawn out. They can be put off for various reasons. So we tend to see lower meeting of targets in those areas.
Does permitting targets include enrollment into general permits?
In this case, yes, it does. Generally, within the pages of the performance report, those are pulled out separately, but for this overall statistic, it is grouped all together.
I think actually it would cover the adoption of a general permit, not, I don't know if we have any targets that are established for enrollment in a general permit.
We actually do. Oh, we do. Sorry. And then this is looking at those same targets or those targets rolled together but then split out in the various regions. And this is not meant to compare regions to each other. It's just meant to show what's going on in the various regions. Some of the regions have adopted the performance report as a tool, as a management tool, and they are actually in it quite a bit and looking at how things are going and giving themselves reminders of what their targets were so that they know that they're going to be coming close to them by the end of the year. Others don't adopt it quite as strongly, so we get very different meeting of the targets in the various regions.
It's interesting, and it was good what you said earlier too, that it's also about how you set the target. So we're doing this as a corraler of our thoughts. Is that a word? In a way to sort of be more focused on what it is we're trying to do. But if you lump all the targets together, it is this mix of, you may have one region that has a much smaller number because they're doing some really big policies that year. And so the percentages, just like in water conservation, don't always tell you the whole story. But it's a tool for being more focused and intentional about what we do rather than whatever.
Exactly. And, you know, there are things that happen during the year that can completely blow the targets out of the water. So, you know, we might expect for Region 1, where they had the big fires, for the next fiscal year, they may not come close to hitting their targets because a lot of resources were redirected for that. So, yeah, looking at just basic numbers like this is definitely not telling the whole story, and we have to be careful with that kind of information.
I'd just like to jump in. One of the things that that we have always stressed with this is that this is not about choosing a target that you're going to get 100%
Correct,
for. Yeah. And so we push the offices and regions to be a little aspirational with their targets, to be realistic but aspirational. So we would not expect to see 100% meeting of targets.
But if you go into the report, you can see little boxes and stories and things like that that add the more full narrative of what's happening.
Correct. Okay, and then this is the last summary statistics slide. This is just looking at some of the actual numbers that were met over this past fiscal year, and then again, including the last 2 fiscal years. So you can see the total regulated facilities have steadily gone up over the last several years. Permits issued or updated is generally about the same. We have more inspections being conducted, which probably reflects the drinking water coming on board. So this kind of wraps it up and gives a little more of the detailed information about what is happening with some of these programs.
It's interesting because you might just jump to the line that's about penalty and compliance actions taken and then see that number drop. And then you look at the penalties assessed and you see the number jump, which would suggest that they were working on fewer high profile or, you know, bigger beans in the wheelbarrow, so to speak.
That's correct. And that if you go into the performance report, you can see that there's a lot more, or there are a lot of sort of the letters of compliance that don't get picked up here, and fewer of the big enforcement penalties. So we are seeing higher assessment of penalties, but not as many of those big things.
Oh, interesting.
And then at this point, I'm going to hand it back to Greg Gearhart to talk about some of the things we're moving towards.
So a lot of the comments we heard a few minutes ago are related to what I'm going to talk about, which is what we're trying to do to enhance kind of the infrastructure behind this report card. I do want to acknowledge again the hard work that we got in partnership from the Division of Information Technology. All those report cards were essentially coded once and then recoded and worked on and then updated because of some needs to update our software. So it's just, Bev, Robert, and Susan did a tremendous amount of work to make this happen over the last few months. The things that I'm trying to talk about would improve some of the infrastructure to get to Board Member Esquivel's point about automating and making more efficient some of the data flow. And not just on staff efficiency, but on efficiency of the information, so that it's quite possible, in my opinion, that we don't have to have an annual report. We could have reports that are available and updated on a quarterly basis or what have you, so that we don't have to wait 6 months after the end of the fiscal year in some cases to see this information if we improve that efficiency loop. So with that in mind, we also would like to start using some of the techniques of open data to provide a more granular view of the information so that people can not only see how many inspections were done at a region, but what type of inspections, where were they done, and were there any follow-ups to those inspections. So that kind of information is in the very near future. It's in our hands. We just need to build some of those pieces in the infrastructure. Part of that includes making the data also available and being transparent. So right now we have numbers in those graphs, like 9. What we'd like to be able to do is provide that more granular information and then publish it so that if somebody wants to see it and use it for their own purposes, we could make it machine readable and published and documented. So another important thing to point out is the efficiencies gained by using a single web page report card that has multiple years of information on the same page. So this is an example of the budget page that's currently available under, I believe it's under the resources tab? Targets tab, under the Targets tab. So this is the same information that is presented in prior fiscal years, but the object in the middle is a Tableau report card that allows the user to interact with it and look at multiple years and eventually even download and play with the data if they want to see it. So this is one way that you could have some interactivity as opposed to just a static number. So those filters, all those drop-down boxes, I can't click on it right now, but all those drop-down boxes and filters can change the years and change the programs that you want to look at. So this is an example of where we want to head with all the report card information. So for example, permits and inspections could be displayed the same way so that one page has multiple fiscal years and the ability to interact with it. And here's the prototype of that. So this would be this is a very first generation prototype, but this would be the same way of interacting with the data as the budget information. So you could look at the program, you could look at the region, you could filter on multiple ways. And we could take feedback quickly from people and update this too, so that if somebody wanted to have a different kind of a filter or a different view or the ability to chart it out or whatever, we could do those kinds of changes pretty easily. This is a Tableau object, in other words, that we can change in my office as opposed to having to make a web request. This is an example of a tool that is evolved out of the discussions this year about the performance report. So this looks at stormwater inspections across the state by program. So there's construction, industrial, Caltrans, municipal, linear. There's all sorts of sort of subtypes. You can plot them out. You can look at just a region. You can look across the regions. You'll see across the top there those shaded areas. The third tab in would be a tool that could be used to identify facilities that have never been inspected. So you could quickly look at who's never been inspected. We'd also like to use this kind of technology to integrate other open data sources like National Weather Service's quantitative precipitation forecast numbers, which would not only tell you who's never been inspected, but whether it's going to rain in that neighborhood or not. So, and that's all available via these kinds of open data techniques. And this is a tool that's actually, I think, being used, and Region 9 has a very similar product that they are using down there. To get to the point about the rest of the story, so if a target isn't met and measures are not telling the whole story, we currently have a small box that allows regional considerations to be documented. What we'd like to do is still have that box, but in a sense, expand it out and allow people to tell the story. So if they worked on a fire, if they worked on something like a San Elijo Lagoon restoration project or what have you, they could tell their story and have a link to it there so that people could provide more of the whole story. This type of format is actually, it comes with our GIS license, and it's a story map template that allows you to integrate data and narration and images and other multimedia things. So as you scroll down on this live version of the page, you would be able to, you see a map on the right, you can zoom in, you can interact with the data. In some cases it's charts, and you can, again, filter and look at the data, as well as read the narrative that describes it. So this is actually where we're headed to with the TMDL report cards. Currently, they're 2-page PDF static things, which we probably still will have because there's a need for a printout sometimes. But this would take the same information and put it into a more interactive format.
Great.
So I want to point out that it's been mentioned a couple times, but this year was the first year in a while that we reinstituted the meetings with the executives across the top. I thought it was very successful. I think Eric and Jonathan led a really good effort. As Tom was migrating out, we had the executive branches of every part of the organization talk and meet about the targets for next year, including getting feedback on whether this performance report is of use to them and what kinds of recommendations they would have towards improving it and addressing it. And by and large, we were all, I think, surprised by the amount of support across the organization there is for this tool. A lot of people were interested in improving the ability to tell the rest of their story. Portfolio management style doesn't really comport well with maybe just counting beans and showing inspections. So we're trying to work on ways to integrate that approach so that we can actually tell the stories of what people are working on. And I don't know if Eric and Jonathan want to add anything, but.
It was actually quite enlightening to meet with all the directors and the executive officers and some of their support staff to talk about how they use the report. It ranges from, I glance at it every once in a while, to we manage our whole our work plan every year on this report. Was also useful because what I did in those meetings was look back at the last few years and not micromanage what their targets were, but have them explain why a target would be different than what they had had. If it was substantially different from the last few years, there was a reason for it. And understanding that reason and juggling between, if just made up example is, well, the number of permits that you're proposing to adopt this year is lower than it has been the last few years. And the response might be something like, well, we're expecting to do a lot more inspections this year, which makes perfect sense.
Answer.
Except that sometimes those inspections weren't shown as increased because they're different people in the organization doing different pieces of it. And it brought that back to the executive officer that they need to coordinate with their different divisions to make sure that they're communicating that, Division A is going to do less because they're expecting to work on stuff for Division B. They need to coordinate that within their work plan. It was a very useful exercise, I felt. Do you have anything you wanted to add?
I would just echo what Greg said. I think we were all really pleasantly surprised at the level of support across pretty much all of the organizations and that people are actually using it because, the early days, to be honest, there was resistance and the relationship wasn't always smooth. But, I'd say there's a lot of buy-in at this point, and I think a lot of work from, over the last 9 years is really starting to pay off now.
No. She's very happy. Other questions, comments? Or do we have any cards on this? Well, let me just add my thanks. I know this is a work in progress, and I know that what's on the back end is massive. But also I do think that conversation about how we can use this to do our work as well as tell our story is the right conversation to be having. And these sorts of performance tools, which I've worked at over the years in different places, are only useful if they are a vehicle for a better conversation and better self-reflection and whatever, so we don't just keep doing what we're doing and assuming that that's because we're good, that's going to make a difference in the world, because we need all the focus and all the tools we can get, and the technological advancement is going to allow us to also use the good thinking and the brain power of people in the outside world who are going to see stuff in our data that we didn't even think to look at because we're so busy and overtaxed trying to do all the things we've been asked to do. So takes a village here. So thank you all for the hard work in addition to the vision. Great. Well, that was nice. Appreciate it. All right. Item number 12, board member reports. It's been, what, a month since our last meeting? So it's really bad when we have to look at your calendar to figure out what you did. That's really sort of, I have no sense of time. Yeah, that's a smart thing to do in advance. Who would like to start? You want to start?
I'll start.
We'll start in the middle for once. All right.
Thanks. I'll quickly go through a couple things I was up to and then talk about a couple upcoming things to let you all know. On January 17th, I attended a groundbreaking ceremony with Mr. Bishop for Prop 1 funded North Hollywood West groundwater cleanup project, a great multi-benefit integrated water project, first starting with groundwater cleanup, but working with LADWP and taking and the different agencies in LA taking advantage of stormwater, recycle water, as well as clean up groundwater to really get groundwater basins up and running from the legacy pollution from the Department of Defense and industries and that sort of thing. Mayor Garcetti was there with council members Krikorian and Martinez, and it was really an honor and privilege to spend some time with them. And I learned I went to the same high school as Councilman Krikorian. Important people were very interested in that part of it.
It's that human part.
The Reseda connection.
It's like your junior high school
Yeah,
story.
exactly.
Yeah. The most important junior high school in the water board.
So then, so moving on, January 19th, I was on a panel with Dave Smith of EPA and Bruce Wolf of Region 2 at the Bay Area Clean Water Agency's annual meeting. Very exciting work they're doing. There's a collaborative effort on nutrient management to really have the right touch in terms of what treatment processes are going to work in what locations in a very, as you know, the Bay Area is a lot of heterogeneity in terms of receiving waters and that sort of thing. So it's a thoughtful process that SFEI is part of, and so it's great to get an annual update on those things and share what we're up to that affects the POTWs. And they're interested in the update of the sanitary sewer overflow WDR from 2006 as one example of the process our staff is undertaking now. I toured on January 22nd the San Mateo Water Quality Control Plant. That particular sewer plant is of interest because the peninsula cities are really looking at, as they rebuild their treatment facilities, how they can contribute to potential potable reuse of wastewater. So actually going beyond purple pipe, looking at the economics of things, and working with SFPUC about hypothetical reservoir augmentation projects. And so it's really pretty exciting to see that whole full circle being contemplated. January 29th, I was asked to speak with some assembly members to the California Municipal Utilities Association, and there had a chance to thank them for continuing to report the monthly water production numbers, but just thank them for their partnership and ongoing commitment to looking at a long-term conservation framework, among other items that I touched on. And just, the assembly members acknowledge it's a busy water year coming up with SB 623, SB 606, the safe drinking water issues and water efficiency issues. So it was good to see that that literacy, that awareness in our partners in the legislature. And then upcoming, I just wanted to let folks know here on the board that the chair's meeting, the annual meeting, has been selected for Monday, April 23rd. And we're going to talk about the DMV project on auto dismantlers and operations to make sure folks have licenses and are following pollution control laws. Also, we're going to touch on SGMA and the role of regional boards and where we overlap with groundwater sustainability plans and the water quality aspect that many boards are looking at the salt and nutrient management plans as one example, and the connection to our recycled water policy update. And then finally, irrigated lands program, our item tomorrow and that ongoing effort to the extent that has resolution to have a good communication with the chairs about that program going forward and what, if we adopt the order, what it means. Yeah. So that'll be, and then we did select a date for Water Quality Coordinating Committee in October. It'll be Tuesday and Wednesday, October 25th, 26th. So looking ahead, I'm sure we'll come up with some interesting things to put on that agenda, but we're not there yet. This week, I'm going to LA and Santa Ana regional board meetings, and the LA board is interested in continuing the dialogue on that we began in November about Los Angeles River flows. So it'll be very high level, but I'll gather some input from the board level and share that with you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Busy, busy. Okay, so I think what I'll do is just focus on 3 different areas. First of all, I've been spending a lot of time, as I think all of us have, on the draft order, and so just have been doing a lot of ex parte meetings, but wanted to better understand Region 3. So I took a couple of days to go out to Region 3 and meet with growers, and I'm sure it'll be part of our discussion tomorrow. Also have been continuing to spend some time on communication in the San Joaquin Valley regarding the drinking water proposal, SB 623. And want to thank Bob Gore for connecting me with the mayor of Fresno and his staff. Had a really good discussion about some of their goals and interests, and just really appreciate you reaching out to the mayor. And then also had a good discussion with Madera Farm Bureau on the drinking water issue, as well as other issues, how the Phase 1 proposal impacts them, and their interest in storage and other issues. And then last week, I participated in the Ag Reuse workshop on recycled water, and I kicked off that event. This is an event that we co-sponsored with the Water Reuse Foundation, which is now the Water Research Foundation, and SAC Regional. It was very well attended. I got a lot out of it. There were speakers from across the country that work on recycled water, and focused on, just initially laying the groundwork about the survey results that our staff worked on, and then also what are the impediments to increased use, and a real focus on treatment to the level that's needed. So of course that's why ag water reuse occupies a big piece of the pie, because of not the need to treat it to levels that would be utilized for other uses. But then also talked about the impediments, research gaps, education, outreach, conveyance, and other issues that can help grow the pie even more. So really good discussion. And then I'll just mention that I'm on UC's California Institute of Water Resources Strategic Planning Commission, and have been attending these meetings over the past, I think, about 6 months, and I'll probably report once we have a final report coming up fairly soon.
In January, I was in Palm Springs for the Southern California Energy Water Conference, and on a panel with Bruce Wilcox and Kim Delfino, representative from IID, and a couple other people speaking about the Salton Sea. So it was a good discussion. I think this year is certainly a critical year for the sea. It's our first year of this sort of official oversight role over the Salton Sea Management Program. So it was a good opportunity just to hear from folks. At the beginning of the conference, Riverside County kind of made a proposal for a north end sort of sea. And because so much of the focus of the Salton Sea Management Program at this point is on the southern end of the sea, where we're going to see the most sort of dust and playa issues, and that's where the Species Conservation Habitat Project is, and et cetera. And there's some wetlands projects to the north, but I think folks on the northern, toward the northern end of the sea want to see some more sort of, attention to that side. So it was interesting to see the proposal, but for us, it's, again, it's going to be a pretty critical year. I've been working quite a bit, again, on, the National Governors Association's Water Policy Learning Network. We'll be having a 2-day conference somewhere in California this year. Don't have dates firmed up yet, but it'll be a pretty good opportunity to showcase, what the state's been doing, particularly on the front of resiliency, responding to fires, flood, and drought all at once, it seems, which is pretty incredible. So it'll be other states, governors, representatives coming here and being able to learn quite a bit. So looking forward to share more insofar as the draft agenda and dates once that starts to firm up. Later this week, Executive Director Sobek and I will be going down to Region 9 for their climate change discussion symposium. So it'll they have yet to necessarily themselves adopt any sort of resolution on climate change, and we're hopeful that this discussion kind of better informs what it is that they'll necessarily include into their resolution and teeing off of ours. And so looking forward to going down and having that discussion. So.
One quick thing, I was able to attend the Central Valley Regional Water Board workshop on the CV salts effort, and want to thank Ms. Sobek for following up and assigning a staff person from DWQ to sort of keep an eye on things, and so Scott Seafried, I think is his name, and so I will continue to meet with him. I asked him to stay updated on the progress of that basin plan amendment, which should be going before the Regional Water Board in June, sometime of this year, and then we'll probably be fast tracking it to us. So it'll be complicated, it'll be controversial, and so it's good to have a DWQ staff person assigned to be very familiar with it and to help all of us, I think, get up to speed on it once it does come our way.
I'll just add a couple of things. I've been spending time trying to do everything other than water fix, in addition to water fix, before we go into hearings, but also spending the time with TAM dealing with a flurry of motions. So it's been sort of an intense period of time. The other things I'd mention is the same day that Steve went to LA for their groundbreaking on that Prop 1 project, I went to the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission for a ceremonial groundbreaking on one of their projects, which was for recycled water, which is something that will allow them to water Golden Gate Park and not be using Hetch Hetchy water or precious groundwater for that. And it was a great event for a variety of reasons, but particularly good because their director of their park service is amazing. So we should just put him out there as our spokesperson for the use of recycled water and the right water, along with Harlan Kelly and others from San Francisco. But very exciting because it's one of those things where San Francisco has there's a mountain to climb because they've had the luxury of all of that Hetch Hetchy water, and they're really taking, I think, a responsible approach to it. So that was nice to see. There was, interestingly, a chart I saw on Twitter. I can't remember where the chart came from. I thought water reuse was a part of it, on water reuse in Northern versus Southern California in general. And the thing that was interesting to me, although not totally surprising, was the level of agricultural use in Southern California is higher as well, which was just interesting to me. I wanted to dig into the details and figure out which plants, which ag lands, and where that was all coming from. So that was actually pretty interesting. It's just nice to see the products of all of that work we've done, the great work of DFA and everyone helping them to get money out the door, finally being in groundbreaking all over the state. That's really, the money award is nice, but the groundbreaking and then the ribbon cuttings are really even the best. So that was actually pretty exciting. I was able, because of a bit of break, also to spend time with the data collaborative that we all know about that's been working on data. And while I couldn't report everything they were doing, it was so nice to be able to just spend hours listening to these very thoughtful local water agency folks really play with their data and figure out how to do experiments to see what they need to know and how they can use that data for better conservation, recycling, and other purposes. So that was I just wanted to do a shout out for that because I was really impressed with them and I learned a lot. I did a number of speaking engagements, but I won't report on those. I just one note that I didn't want to go by from last week, and some of you may have been able to go. I taped a video tribute to Jennifer Persyke from Aqua, who is retiring, who was main lead on the Save Our Water. Repeat after me, SaveOurWater.com project, and what an incredible spokesperson for that. I think she's going to continue to do some work on that as a consultant, but I didn't want the day to pass without at least mentioning publicly our thanks for the great work and partnership, and just watching her in action give presentations on conservation and the marketing of it, but also the importance of it and the heart that she put into it, as well as the intellect, was really, really impressive. And I'm glad she'll still be a part of it, because you have all the ideas in the world on what ought to happen, or someone ought to do something, but it only happens when you get those rare individuals that pull it all together and are really into doing it. And she really, one of the people I respect the most out there. So thank you, Jennifer. All right, that brings us to a recess into closed session before we reconvene tomorrow on item number 13. I'm going to try and figure out how to do some time management. We have 2 personnel items and 1 water fix closed session. I'm thinking we probably want to do the water fix closed session first, just from a timing perspective. So why don't we reconvene in that room we always convene in? 2:30. Why don't we just say 11:30? And I would suggest that folks grab whatever they're going to have for lunch, and then gives the water fix team a chance to get downstairs, and then folks who would be coming in for those personnel items, just watch your phones for texts, or we'll have somebody reach out to you to let you know. So if you get your lunch, we'll just work through that, the lunch hour. But a 20-minute break now to check your email and get whatever you need and get whatever food you need. Is that all? Oh, it convenes at 10 a.m. Thank you very much. All right.
It is Tam Month.
Yeah, happy Tam, that's what we want. All right. Thank you. We stand recessed.